Hello, gentlemen.
Joseph.
Hello, Joe. How do we pronounce your last name?
We pronounce it Leoce, although it's kind of spelled Leoce. Half the family spells it my way. Half the family spells it Lioce. We're probably both wrong. One of those Ellis Island stories of, what's your name, Leoce? How do you spell it? What's spelling?
Yeah.
Pretty common. But but it's been Leoce, and some people, teachers, I remember having a lot of problems with it in school.
Yeah, well, those were the two ways that we were guessing. It was either going to be the soft C or the chi kind of sound. Well, it's good to meet you, sir.
Yeah, very good to meet
you as well. I've enjoyed some of the podcasts that I've seen. Obviously excited with Mike Puccio's podcast. I've known him for a long time and consider him my brother from another mother, if you will.
Oh, excellent.
And a lot of other people as well. Some I've caught, J.R. Tracy is a good friend of mine, and a lot of the other guys from these past a million years, it seems.
Yeah, we had interviewed JR really early in the show, like 100 episodes ago, probably more. Right. And I remember him going, "How did you pick me?" And I was like, "Well, I met you at an ASL tournament, and you are a gamer in New York." And back then, we didn't think we could get the big names.
He's a big name. JR is terrific.
Yeah, isn't he?
And his. I don't know if you've ever had the pleasure of going to his space, if you will, in Manhattan, but it's definitely an experience. I remember going there, and besides the fact that it's opulent with 12 or 14-foot ceilings and mahogany shelves and all this other stuff, every military book I've ever seen anywhere he has. Every military game I've ever seen anywhere he has, along with lots of other games on all different subjects and titles. And every day, more and more stuff pours in, and there are just piles of books and models and games in the corner. And there's almost no room for the players, if you will. It's amazing. It really is.
Yeah, our guy like that is Mike Rizzi here, and I don't think he's been to JR's place, but he knows of JR's place. Yes. And he also could tell us how massive and complete it is with everything you'd ever want.
Yeah, it's just amazing. And he's a very gracious host. And I've got to know his wife over the years and met his daughters and all that stuff. So it's he's a special guy, and he's special to the hobby as well.
Yeah, and he is active on Twitter. He's one of the guys that we see a lot of postings on, and he plays lots of different games too.
Yeah, he does.
Yeah, we should try to get him on again, Dave, and maybe get a video tour of his space if he.
Oh, it's definitely worthwhile.
Yeah. So where are you, Joseph?
I'm in Staten Island, New York. It's interesting because there are many New Yorkers who have never been on Staten Island. Some who profess they never ever want to come onto Staten Island, and I was raised in Brooklyn, and at some point in time, it seemed as though every Italian or Jew in Brooklyn moved to Staten Island, and when they got here, the native Staten Islanders say, this used to be a nice place till you ruined it, and they go west to New Jersey. Well, I've stayed here. I've been in this home for 44 years or so, and probably got to Staten Island a couple years before that. And it really was before the bridge went up. It was a lot of farmland and stuff out here. When my family first moved out in '73, we moved not far from here, and I think there were a grand total of 6 houses on this road with nothing behind it. And now forget about it. Yeah, every place there's a postage stamp size piece of land they're building on it.
Amazing.
Yeah.
So
amazing. I personally, and I'm probably going to speak for Dave here too, have no knowledge of the New York, the whole New York culture and the whole thing, other than what little we pick up from TV shows.
Well, I'm sure you've heard of the Staten Island Ferry, and my uncle.
Yeah.
Bill was a captain for 35 years and a supervising captain. I've steered the boat. My kids have steered the boat. It's really a great New York thing, and it still costs nothing. You can ride it for free in both directions.
Huh.
So if you ever get a chance, I'll do what I did when I was entertaining clients as a radio time salesman in New York City. I'd take them on the boat for nothing, buy them a hot dog and a Coke, and they were happier than if I took them to, a New York famous restaurant.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
It was really something, a lot of fun.
That's great. Someday somebody's going to figure out if you have it free one way, but you have to pay to get the other way.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
The stat now is there's so much tourism that if they charged $1, they'd make a lot of money for the city using it. But for some reason, they've just never done it.
Yeah. Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So you've been there for a long time now.
Yeah.
How did you get into gaming? Let's get into your history.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an identical twin. I have literally my other brother, Daryl. And in fact, it's interesting because everybody knows me as Joe Leoce, but I was called Joel all my life because my brother was a surprise, and my mother named my brother out of a baby book and decided that with twins, Joel and Daryl would sound nice. It would sound fun. So I was called Joel all my life, and yet it really isn't my name. So it's interesting because some people know me as Joel. Most people know me as Joe, and I kind of don't subscribe to either. I mean, I'm comfortable or uncomfortable with either of them. So that's
but depending on who's talking to you.
Yeah, something like that. As kids, I had a built-in play partner, and we did what a lot of, I guess, you and a lot of the other kids did. We played Army men and stuff like that. And then, wintertime would come around and we'd build the ice forts out front and, have mock battles and whatnot. And I guess also back then, and I'm 69 now, they had the Mattel toys and the Greenie Stickum caps and the guns. And so it just seemed like so much of the toys that we played with were related in some way, shape, or form to, shooting or warfare or something like that. And then I guess at some point we started to get into the games like, I guess the early Civil War game, Battle Cry. And I remember I've even gotten some vintage games. One year at the Albany Tournament, and we do raffles every year, I got copies of all 4 of those games, the Battle Cry, and then
Dogfight.
Yes, Dogfight, which was great, and Hit the Beach. And there was another one too, and
with ships.
Yeah, and I gave and Tom Moran won it, and he won one of them and traded so he could get all 4 of them because he remembered playing those with his 2 brothers when he was when they were kids. So we played all those games, and I remember the Swamp Fox game, which I guess grew out of the Disney television show. And it just seemed like, Marx would put out the Civil War set with the exploding bunker and, and the caissons and everything. And they'd have the television commercials and, you'd be inspired. And then on top of that, they used to have the $1 Million Movie in New York where every night they'd show the same movie Monday through Friday, and then on Saturday and Sunday show the same film 3 times a day. And I can remember watching Gunga Din every week it was on. It still remains my favorite film. And so I guess, those were how my interest started to build. In terms of, getting into ASL, back in the early 80s, and I don't know exactly when in the 80s it was, I was selling advertising time for stations around the country, and there was one in Detroit that had never had Toys R Us business on before, and I won them the Toys R Us business. And so to reward me, they sent me $100 worth of gift certificates to Toys R Us. So I took the family to Toys R Us, and everybody got something. And I'm looking around, and I find Squad Leader on the shelf. and, take a look at it and take a look at the soldier and the description of Stalingrad and this and that. And it sounded really interesting and like it was a lot of fun. So I got it, and I found what then I thought was a pretty large instruction booklet inside, which I think was all of maybe 40 pages.
Oh yeah.
Was, the programmed instruction where it's stop. You've learned enough to play the first scenario.
Yeah.
And my wife's younger sister had just started to go out with the guy who became my brother-in-law. And I said, "Are you interested in this stuff?" And he said, "Yeah, it looks pretty cool." So we started to get into it. And we did the whole program thing, and started to play the games and enjoyed it, and probably were playing those games for a couple of years. And at some point, for some reason, we stopped playing. And I wasn't even aware exactly when Advanced Squad Leader came out, but at some point, for some reason, I got interested in getting back into it, and I found Advanced Squad Leader, and it was an interesting concept, and it was a little strange and a little frightening because it almost seemed like, to simplify the game, they made it more complex. It's kind of a hard thing to describe, but there were complexities that weren't there before, and yet there were aspects of it, like I think firing and moving and things like that, which were actually simpler than it was before, in my opinion. So we started to play that, and the only opponent I had was my brother-in-law. And in fact, what we used to do was, I was the only one with my own home, so all the family events would end up here for Thanksgiving and Christmas and all. So what we try and do is set up a game at some point, and what we'd have to do is play either really late at night or not at all. So we'd end up being up till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning. And then what we started to do is he lived in Brooklyn, and we started to say, you know what, let's play over the phone. So I'd say, I'll call you at 11:30, and we'd call each other, and we'd leave the line open, and we'd have the boards set out in front of us, and dice and whatnot. And for 2, 3, 4 hours, we'd play one another over the phone.
Just talking and describing the movements.
Yeah, speaking over the phone and calling out the hex numbers and the movement points and all this other stuff. And we both trusted one another implicitly, so there was never a question that deuce was a deuce or whatever else it was. So we did that for quite a while, and then finally we got the irk or the desire to play somebody else. And we became aware of Atlanticon 1990. And so that turned out to be the first tournament we ever attended. We took the Amtrak down, and it was really nice. We went in the dining car from Manhattan, where we both worked, and we went down. And I remember Camden Yards was being built in the distance, and it was at some convention center, if you will. And it was huge. I mean, I think there was something like 130 guys or something playing ASL, and there were lots of other games going on, et cetera, et cetera. So it was the first time we played anyone other than each other. And it's interesting because there were some rules that we were interpreting or misinterpreting a certain way that we discovered the correct interpretation of there, like rate of fire. And I remember the first time I'm sitting there against the guy with a heavy machine gun. He's going, bang, rate of fire, bang, rate of fire. And there's like 7 or 8 shots, and my mouth was open. I couldn't believe it. And then at the end of that session, I went to my brother-in-law and said, "Hey, did you know?" And he had the same experience. And so,
so when you guys played it, did you only take one rate of fire, even if you rolled?
I think so. I can't remember because it's a long time ago exactly how we did it, but somehow we missed that, and it wasn't evident to us in the rule book that was the way to play it. So that was an experience, and it was a fun experience that we enjoyed very much. And so after that, when it became, I guess, Avalon Con, we used to go down and attend Avalon Con and play every year. It would be like our annual pilgrimage. So that was a lot of fun.
Let me ask you, in these early days when you were playing with your brother-in-law, were you aware that there was this big community of gamers out there? Were you involved in any of that? The news?
I wasn't. I wasn't involved in it. I guess I kind of had an inkling that it existed, but for whatever reason, it was something that we really didn't seek out for a while. I mean, maybe we thought the wives wouldn't let us go. I'm not sure. But at any rate, once we got into it, it was incredible. It was like a revelation, and it was so much fun, and it grew. And then all of a sudden, it started to shrink is probably too strong a term, but the numbers began to dwindle and began to go back in the other direction. And I remember, wondering about why that was. And I guess among the reasons were the fact that more regional tournaments had started to pop up, and people were finding tournaments closer to home that they could go to, and either, maybe they can even go and play and not even have to stay at a hotel or whatever else it was. So that happened. And so I don't know exactly when it was the first time I went to the Nor'easter, but the Nor'easter tournament up in Boston, or the environs around Boston, was a tournament that had started. And so I had some friends who knew some other people who were involved with that. And so I went up there and enjoyed that. And what that led me to was I started to make models. ASL got me into reading military history, and then collecting, military books. And after a while, they got kind of dry. So I branched out to like alternate history, or military fiction and things like that. And then I went from World War II to the other eras, et cetera, et cetera. And it also got me into model making. And I had made models primarily of cars and hot rods and things like that as a kid, and at some point started to get more sophisticated and started to do the putting different engines in, or doing the flocking and making it look like it was actual material on the seats and all that stuff. And then I had never done any military models. So ASL got me into, let me try a tank. So I think the first tank I made was either a Sherman, an artillery Sherman, or a Panzer IV. And I just, I did them up, and I, painted them with paintbrushes and whatnot, and they were okay. And I set them aside for a while. And then I go up to the Nor'easter, and one of the guys up there, Steve Johns, who's also an excellent designer of scenarios, he was a model maker, and he made the first place trophy, which was a diorama. And it was, I think I recall it were a couple of German Panzer Grenadiers placing a magnetic mine on, I think it was a KV or T-34, I can't remember, but he did a really nice job with it, and I got inspired. So I came back, and I pulled my models out, and I started to work on them in different ways. And I took the Sherman, and I started to do scratch building, and I built the cages and made sandbags out of putty, and poured plaster over my son's Indiana Jones base, which had parts that looked like it was like the entrance to a bridge. And I made a winter diorama, and that was my first attempt. And I ultimately went on to make more and more dioramas, and I was making them for the Nor'easter every year. And then what happened was I decided that, hey, New York should have a tournament. And one of the real impetus behind it for me was that I wanted more places to play, because I would play at Atlanticon or AvalonCon, and I would play at Nor'easter, but that was about it. And I didn't play as many scenarios or as many games as I would like to. So I said, boy, I'd love to have another place to play, and New York should have its tournament. But in looking around, it really is impossible to do it in New York City itself, because it's too expensive. Logistically, it's too hard to get around. Food is expensive, the hotels are expensive, et cetera, et cetera. I did explore one thing, because in my radio career, one of my clients was the carrier Intrepid. And, they would advertise for people to do tourism and whatnot. And I remember one year there was a modeling show on the carrier. And so I was thinking that it would really be nice to do an ASL tournament within the confines of the carrier itself. It would really be cool. But the guy I was working with was a difficult guy to work with, and I never really got a clear picture of their degree of interest or how much money was involved, and I kind of let it drop. And then I decided that since New York seemed impossible, let me look for a location that would sort of be central to the Northeast, that would draw players or could draw players from New England, Connecticut, Western New York, Maryland, like that. And I just kind of pinpointed Albany. It just seemed geographically to be in the right place. And from the standpoint of highways and things like that, fairly easy to get to. And so I started to work on this idea. And I had a couple of friends. Gary Trezza was the guy who really was my right-hand man, if you will. I was the founder because I had the idea, but he had a lot more experience with tournaments, and he was a lot more into the community in terms of contacting them and being in touch with people either by phone or over the internet, both locally, nationally, regionally, even internationally. And so he got involved, and we came up with this idea, and I found a hotel. It was over the internet. I never physically went up there, and it was a Best Western. And so it just so happened that I lucked out because they had a ballroom, and it was spacious, and it was well lit, and it was reasonably priced. And so I just started to, come up with this idea and was able to put it together. And so I think 2004 was the year that we launched Albany. And I guess we had about 25 attendees, which seemed to be, pretty good. It was fewer than I had hoped for, but, not bad for the first time out. And people liked it. And we started to have it again and again. And Gary was instrumental because what he would do is he'd get out to these players and challenge them. And he'd say, so-and-so is out to get you or is looking for a game with you. He says he can kick your ass. And so Gary was that kind of a guy. And he ultimately drove a lot of interest and attention. And so we started to grow. And I think in that second year, we probably went from 25 to 37. And then in year 3, we were probably up, in the mid 40s. And ultimately, it gained the reputation of being a real tough field, very competitive, and a good place to play, and a good venue with, seamless tables and just a nice environment and all that stuff. And it went along real well. And we ultimately got to the point where I think at the height, we hit about 65 players with 5 Europeans. Toby Pilling came over from England, and we had players coming over from Norway and Sweden and whatnot. And then we'd get Canadians, and maybe we'd have 5 or so Canadians, and we got some players from, like as far west as Chicago. I think once Mark McCloskey came in from California before he really started his whole Australian thing with first with his guys and then ultimately with MMP recently. So it really became very successful. And then at some point, Gary burned out, and he's just decided that he wanted out. And I forget the timing now. I mean, sometimes I can't remember what I did yesterday, but so I can't remember the specifics of the dates and things like that. But Gary said, I'm not going to do it anymore. And he stayed active in sort of helping us to maintain our website. But other than that, he wasn't involved any longer. And one of the things that he did was he did all the on-site organization. He did the matchups. He did the rules interpretations. He did the adjudications. I wasn't interested in any of that. And in fact, I've told people before, if people depended upon me to do that at Albany, Albany would die, because my only interest is I'll organize it in terms of, the place and the raffle and stuff. And then I just want to play. And so what happened was, and I forget the exact date again, but Steve Pleva became interested. and decided that he wanted to be part of our tournament. I mean, my God, the best player in the world, the best player in the U.S., however you want to look at it or what have you,
well,
decides
that would be me.
That would be you. Okay, sorry. Well, the second best decides that he wants to be involved with us in a big way. And so him coming on really gave us even greater credibility and more interest and and more focus from other places, et cetera, et cetera. And it brought in a new element, which was, Steve likes to put together his Pleva bidding system for bidding on scenarios and things like that. And so he got involved when Gary pulled away, which was great because I needed that other person or persons to be involved in that stuff, because I don't play enough scenarios to and don't have enough interest to pick them out and go through 50 or 60 or 70 or 80 scenarios to determine which 25 or 30 make the tournament for what reasons, etc. But that's what he does, and so we've done that. And we have seen our numbers decline somewhat, in the past couple of years, and obviously COVID was part of it as well. But even before that, we saw that 65 go down to 55, 50. We're probably to the point now where we're a pretty solid 40 to 45, which is a nice sized tournament, certainly. But I guess I'm not really expecting that we're going to get back to that 65 number. For whatever reason, just people as they age, they go other places or they develop other interests, et cetera, et cetera. But it still remains a very well regarded and respected tournament, which I'm very proud of. And we still get a lot of guys, a lot of people who are regulars and who come back every year. And every year there'll be, somebody who comes out of the woodwork who we haven't seen in a while. And, we sometimes I give a little encouragement to people to get them over from Europe, et cetera, to try and pump that up again, because that fell off certainly in the past few years, but that's the story. So it's been a labor of love. Among the other things that I was in preparing for this call, I was looking back at some of the stuff because, when I was playing at some point in the beginning, I wanted I like to write. And so I decided that I would do a write-up of one of my scenarios as a narrative. So I wrote a story called Bridge to Nowhere about the scenario Bridge to Nowhere. And I found Rob Walt, who at the time was hooked up with Kurt Schilling in a magazine called Fire for Effect, which was out of the Pacific Northwest. And they printed my first story in 1992. And so I really enjoyed seeing it in print and having it out there. And so I wrote another one, which was about cold crocodiles, which I called St. Just. And I sent that to them. And as it turned out, they were disbanding the magazine, but Critical Hit picked it up. And so they sent my submission to Ray Tapio, and he printed my story in the first Critical Hit magazine. Of course, one of the things that I learned about Ray, and I learned this later when I did my scenario, Final Crisis at Blackpool, which became a Critical Hit scenario, was that Ray would take it upon himself to make changes without consulting the author. So when it made it into the magazine, it was called St. Just and ASL, fantasy trip or something like that, or no, St. Just on my mind, an ASL fantasy trip. Well, I just wanted to call it St. Just because I thought that I liked that title. So I made it into the magazine, and it was fun seeing it there. And then at some point, I had never tried my hand at designing scenarios, but I decided to give it a shot. And in this case, Mike Puccio had quite a few scenarios out, so I asked him for his help. And I got a book by Major John Masters called The Road Past Mandalay. And I guess John Masters was a British officer who served with the Gurkhas in Burma. And I read the book, and there was a pretty vivid description of an action that took place during the monsoon, in which this blocking position they had set up was attacked and ultimately overrun. And so I started to work on it, and over the course of a few, weeks, months, whatever it was, came up with this design. And so I submitted it to MMP. And a couple of, let's say a month or two later, I wrote a letter, or I contacted them in some way saying, hey, what's the status of my scenario, and when will I see it? And the response I got was, well, we haven't gotten to it. We have no idea. It may never get published. So I said, well, that's not good. So I actually had to officially withdraw it from MMP so that I could give it out elsewhere. And so when I withdrew it, I sent it to Evan Sherry at Schwerpunkt, and I sent it to Ray. And so I didn't hear anything about it for a while. And all of a sudden I get contacted by Evan Sherry, and he sends me a copy of their playtest version. They're about to start playtesting it, and he was considering changing the name to just Crisis at Blackpool, and there were a couple of changes he wanted to make. And I was getting real juiced up because Schwerpunkt had a great reputation, and at that point in time, lots of really cool scenarios were coming out and were really getting a lot of play and a lot of respect. Well, the next day, I get contacted by Ray, and he said, yeah, did you get your new copy of Critical Hit? So, no, he said, turn to page blah, 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 and you'll find CH97, Final Crisis at Blackpool. So, okay. So what I had to do was, over the course of 3 years, contact people nationally and internationally, and kind of in effect, beg them to play my scenario. And I gave them the errata, which corrected what Ray had changed, because the initial results seemed a little imbalanced. And slowly, I got more and more play, and everybody who was playing it enjoyed it. And it finally got to the point where, I offered up prizes. There's a tournament in Blackpool, England, and my comment was, how can Final Crisis at Blackpool not be included at the tournament in Blackpool? So what I did is, I'll tell you what, I'll make up prize for the best British commander and the best Japanese commander, and you can award that simply to get it to be played by more people. And with all of those efforts, it's, I guess it was published in 1998. It sits 25 and 28 in Roar with like a 7.13 rating. And it's really, it's been in the Albany Tournament once or twice. It's been at the Nor'easter, and it's been at some other tournaments as well. And that's the only scenario that I have in print. And at this point, it's likely the only one that I'm going to have, because I don't really have any interest in doing another one for whatever reason, but that's the story there. One year, which is interesting, I was at Avalon Con, and a very attractive reporter from the Baltimore Sun walks in, and I started to talk to her, and I ended up in the Baltimore Sun in the story about the tournament and about Advanced Squad Leader and all this other stuff.
Wow.
So yeah, that was a lot of fun. And and also what I've done is I make the diorama trophies. I guess over the years I've probably made a total of about 25 or 26 of them. And at one point I literally had 0 at home. I didn't have one. They were all, I sold 2, and every other one was given away as a tournament trophy, either at the Nor'easter or at Albany. But what I do with them is I name them by me, and then I describe, what it is and where, and then the title of, first place at whatever tournament it is, et cetera, et cetera. So Steve Pleva has about 5 or 6 of them. Yeah. JR has about 4 of them. Paul Sidhu has about 4 of them. There are a lot of them out there, but there's a relatively small group of people who actually have them.
You have any pictures? Did you take any pictures of any of those?
I've got some pictures, and I could ultimately send them to you if you'd like to see them. Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I always I'm not one of these modelers who counts the rivets and says, oh, I've got to cut the rivets off this 1/35th scale vehicle because they're wrong. I just want the scene to look interesting and dynamic, and tell a story. So that's kind of what I base it on. And it's been a lot of fun, and it's been an element. It's one of the things that ASL led me to, and that sort of opened up the scope of what I do in the hobby.
Well, I noticed your scenario is 25 to 28
Yes.
on Roar. So
Right. Yeah, it was important to me to have a balanced scenario and something that was an interesting challenge, and et cetera, et cetera. And so yeah, it took a long time to get it there. It really did. There were a lot of people who just, especially in the beginning, seeing that it was a critical hit scenario, they just came out and said, I'm not interested. And I had to convince them. So that was another labor of love, if you will.
Yeah.
A lot of guys that we talk to seem to experience a gap. You know, they start off playing squad leader, and then they play ASL, and then they have this big interruption in their lives called family.
Yes.
And 20 years later, then they get back into the hobby again. Did you have any big gaps like that? Doesn't sound like it. Sounds like you've been.
No, because running the tournament always kept me involved.
Yeah.
And it was always something that I did. And, I had a young family when I started, so that was never a problem. And I was always, cognizant of not, cutting into family time and all that other stuff. And my wife was nice enough to, let me go away for, 2 or 3 days, a couple of times a year, and deal with that. So that never turned out to be a problem. Interestingly, when the pandemic started, I basically didn't do any modeling for a while. I made a couple of models for myself, a 1/35th scale PT 109, and there was one that I had seen that I was really interested in, that I never had an interest in making it for anybody but myself. But there was one Panzerabteilung, a heavy Panzer group, that had a couple of Panthers onto which they welded Panzer IV turrets to turn them into self-propelled guns. And there were a couple of pictures of one of those vehicles on a freight car being transported. And so I said, I really would like to make that. But I really lost interest in making 1/35th scale models, because as you start to get older, it starts to get more and more difficult to work with the really tiny pieces. So I started to work in larger scales, like 1/25th and 1/16th. So there's a guy in Australia who makes 1/25th scale resin parts, and he had a really cool Panzer IV turret out of resin. And then I had a 1/25th Tamiya Panther, and then I found the parts that were available out there in the internet to scratch build a 1/25th scale rail car, and I created it. And it took a while, and my intention is to enter it into a competition, and but that was something that I was interested in. But in terms of modeling, I started to do less of that, and I started to become interested in some other games. And all through the years, up until a couple years ago, I literally only played ASL. And after a while, I guess maybe you look for other things, or one of the things that I find too about ASL is it is a bit of a grind sometimes in terms of the rules and the rule book and all that other stuff. And sometimes it's fun to find something that's challenging and interesting, but more simplistic. And to a certain degree, sometimes, a little more fun. And so I found, I got interested in some solitaire games at the beginning of the pandemic. And one of them that I found a copy of was The Raid on Saint Nazaire, which was a really cool, takes a while to play, and there's a lot of dice rolling and stuff like that. And you've got to keep records as you lose commandos and motor launches and whatnot, but it really is an excellent solitaire game. And so then I started to look for other games, and I found a few that were interesting to play that were specifically designed as solitaire games. But then it wet my whistle, and I started to look for games that were solitaire friendly, because really sitting here, I don't have as many opponents as I would like. My brother-in-law, who was my opponent for all those years, just fell out of ASL and gaming completely a number of years ago, and I can't even convince him to get back to play 3 hours, one night a week. And so luckily I did hook up with a guy by the name of Nick Richardson, who's a game designer and game developer who works for MMP. And he and I were playing regularly one night a week for quite a while. Life's gotten in the way of that for a while now, so we haven't played in quite a while now. But we'll get back to it eventually. But he plays a lot of other games as well, and so I've been developing a whole library of new games, and I've always been interested in things like Napoleonics and the Civil War, and so I found a number of games that are along those lines and involve those battles and that kind of warfare that have been a lot of fun. And so I've been fooling around with that. And in fact, I think Albany rolled around this past year, and I think I'd only played 1 or 2 scenarios all that last year leading up to Albany. And as it turned out, my record probably reflected that, because I was 0-3-2. But I was a very competitive 0-3-2. Only one of the games was a real I won't even call it a blowout, but it wasn't close. Interestingly enough, the others were close. Even that the one draw I decided on had an interesting story, but I play to play. I don't expect to win. I did win. I came in third at the second Albany in 2005. Excuse me. I came in third, and I came in third at Nor'easter 5. But those were the only times that I've really finished with any kind of a trophy or anything like that. But I don't care. As long as I'm having fun and the camaraderie is there. I'm not playing a cutthroat game. I'm just there to have fun and just have a good time.
That's a great attitude. Have you done any virtual? You started off playing by phone, but now with COVID, everybody's doing vast things.
I tried to get into it a year ago, maybe even a little longer than that. I forget. It was sometime during the pandemic, and Carl Nagara was really helpful, because for whatever reason, with the computer and the computer setup that I had at the time, I was having great difficulty in trying to get it loaded. And literally, Carl, I think it took like 3 one-hour sessions with he and I for me to get it loaded finally into my computer. So I did, and then I started to fool around with it, and I started to play my first scenario with Mike Puccio. And we got through maybe, a couple of turns, and then what happened was my computer screen went dead, and I had to get a new computer. And so I got rid of it. So now, once again, I have a new computer with nothing loaded. And I was looking at the whole, do I now have to go through the whole 3-hour, thing again with Carl to get loaded? And to tell you the truth, I didn't enjoy the process that much. I mean, I much prefer playing in person. Outside of playing ASL online, and I really don't have enough experience with Vassal to judge how good or bad it is for me. I've never found a computer game that's anywhere near as satisfying as playing ASL face to face. And one of the things that I didn't like about it, and maybe it was just the fact that I wasn't far enough along to be able to negotiate the views and all, but I like to have a larger view, a more global view, and sometimes you lose that when you hone in on like the different areas on the board, and it begins to become more difficult to sort of get the ebb and the flow of the battle and the movement, because you're not seeing this part over here because you're playing on this part over there. So at least that was my early experience, and maybe that sort of soured me on it a little bit. I'm not sure. But, at this point, I didn't play in 2020's Albany virtual tournament. They were telling me, sure, you'll be up and running, you'll take a couple of weeks. And I didn't feel like I was going to be anywhere near up to speed enough to play and to give a good game and a fun game to an opponent, because I was going to be very slow and very hesitant in terms of how to move and what I needed to do and all that other stuff. So rather than do that, I just decided that I wouldn't play at all. So 2020, I was involved in the organization, but I didn't play at all that year. So, we'll see what happens going forward, but I think it's just as likely that I won't be Vaseline as if I will.
Did, just for Jeff, I think you were with when Trezza came down to the ASL Open in Chicago.
Yes.
Jeff, he was the guy that had a penalty flag with him.
Yes.
And he threw it at the ground and started saying, like, penalty on so-and-so for whining like a baby. Yeah. And I was like, oh my God, who is this guy?
Yeah, Gary was, he's been a professional referee, and we used to have a lot of fun with him using sort of that part of his personality. In addition to that, and if you remember, he looks an awful lot like Benito Mussolini.
He does.
And so what we did one year is I found a bust of Mussolini, and I told the crowd, I'd always come up with like a surprise something or other at Albany that would be to poke fun at somebody or sort of have fun at somebody's expense in a good way. And so I told everybody, I've got this bust of Gary Trezza, and I present Mussolini and everybody gets a laugh. And then one year, I wrote up a T-shirt because he used to do the adjudication, and he used to really be very serious about how if you missed the time limit or if you did this or you do that, the game would be adjudicated and he would be very, very tough, et cetera, et cetera. So I had the translation. I think it's La Perde de Giudicio, whatever. It was like, you lose the adjudication in Italian. And I had a T-shirt printed or a sweatshirt, and so it was sort of like telling the players that this is something you don't want to see. And then I'd give Gary the T-shirt, and he'd put it on, and he'd walk around the room and sort of threaten everybody and whatnot. But one of the biggest things was one year at the Winter Offensive, they would always have some surprise prizes that were mystery prizes. So there would be, all the boxes and all this great stuff, and there'd literally be like 2 boxes in brown paper with a question mark. So Gary ends up winning one of them, and you get to choose, like A or B, and he chooses B. And it turned out to be a box of board 9s. And so to this day, everybody remembers Gary Trezza opening up his prize with all this expectation and finding, I don't know how many were in there, 25, 50 board 9s. So that's the.
Which one is 9? Is that one of the river ones or?
No, 9 is like a mountainous board.
Okay.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great fun.
Where did you get 25 board 9s?
Oh, I didn't. It was MMP runs Winter Offensive. And so it was from the MMP warehouse. Yeah. So and every year I think they come up with something that's a little funny, if not funky.
Joe, had you come out to the ASL Open at all, or?
No, then I went to one. It was not an ASL only tournament. There was one. I guess it's the board game championship. I think it was taking place in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and so I went there one year. And ASL was one of the events. And the way they ran that tournament was they would have this blind event where you'd go in and they'd give you I think there was an option, a board would be picked or 1 or 2 boards. And then there would be vagaries and there would be some options in terms of what was happening, and you were kind of playing blind. You weren't sure what the victory condition was. It was strange. And so I ended up playing a game and I lost. And then what happened was in the second round, only the winners went ahead to play and all the losers left. And at that point, I literally had nobody to play ASL with. So here I am, I'm away at a tournament, only interested in playing ASL. And after one game, I have nobody to play.
Oh,
so
yeah, it's not.
I bounced around. I think my buddy Nick was working for MMP at the time, and he played a game with me later that afternoon when he had some time. But then the next day, there was nobody. I ended up coming home the next morning. It was really, I was planning on being there for 3 days of ASL, and I didn't even get one full day of ASL out of it. So those experiences might have soured me a little bit. I haven't been out to Oktoberfest yet. One of the reasons is it's a longer way to go, and it seems like, depending upon how you play it, it's a longer period of time that you might be there. So and also open gaming doesn't interest me as much. You know, I'm not really one of these people who gets a scenario and puts a list together and say, oh, I really want to play this one. You know, it's there. Actually, I find it a little easier, a little more comforting, if that's the right way to look at it, having a finite list of scenarios, you know, from among which I can choose and only stay with, you know, these three or whatever, that kind of a thing, as opposed to the world is your oyster. I've never really been that good at, you know, sussing that kind of stuff out.
Yeah, that's, well, hopefully they fixed having I think most tournaments now, everybody gets to play even when you lose these days. But yeah, the ASLOC was all open. It was different. I was young when I went there. But yeah, and you can get that if you don't know everybody. Yeah, it's easy to feel like you're just this odd person out, you know.
Yeah.
Because I did my first ASL Open by myself, and I didn't know any. And that was where JR beat me. I actually ended up like going for third place or something crazy.
Wow.
But that was mostly luck, I think. And then JR beat me. Yeah, but I felt like I don't really know everybody here. And
yeah.
But of course, over all the years, you know.
Yeah, for sure. It's I would feel more comfortable now than I would have back then.
Yeah, and I'm sure Jeff and I will say, "Oh, we'll have to come out to Albany someday," and then we probably never will.
Yeah, it's. I mean,
we say that to everyone.
There are a lot of things like that, and I mean, the more the merrier, and we'd love to have you and all that other good stuff. And you know, I'll offer you both free registration for whatever that's worth.
Okay.
If you come out our way.
We have our media passes.
Yeah, right, that kind of thing.
Press.
And that's the story.
Press, yeah.
Yeah. So when is the Albany tournament usually, and how is it looking for this year? What are you thinking?
It's always the first weekend after Thanksgiving, and the reason for that was we looked for, you know, a time of year when there weren't competing tournaments and where, you know, we were far enough away from like the Christmas holiday that it was still reasonable. And you know, when we looked around, there were no real opportune times of year that weren't really close to another already established tournament somewhere. And we just hit upon that first weekend after Thanksgiving as a time when we'd be able to get the greatest number of players, and we'd be far enough from Christmas that we wouldn't cut into that time of the year. So it remains that. So this year it's going to be December 1st through the 4th. In terms of how it's shaping up, we had a problem with our hotel. We were at the Best Western Hotel, one of them, for 13 consecutive years, and we never had a problem. And then one year, and I forget, you know, the exact year it was, but only a couple of months before the tournament, and I don't even know why I did, I contacted the hotel, and the guy gets on the phone and says, well, we're going to have a problem. So what do you mean? He said, well, the hotel is being converted into like a senior citizen's home. And I said, when? And they said, well, by the time, you know, your tournament it's going to be converted. I said, well, when were you going to tell me this? Were you going to tell me this like the week before? I said, I've got to find an alternative. So interestingly enough, they own 2 other hotels in the area. One of them was a much larger hotel that had more desirable, like party space. Because what we run into when you get close to the holidays is some of these ballrooms being used for these holiday parties. Now, there's been less of that over the years, the way corporations have been going. So it's not as difficult as it used to be. But one of the hotels was a no-go, but there was another one they had, which was out by the airport. And luckily, they had a similarly sized ballroom, and they were available, and we were able to just slip right in there, and it worked out fine. Well, that worked out fine for a few years, and now this past year, I got a call 2 days before the tournament, and the only reason I got the phone call from the person was because one of the players contacted the hotel to see if he could get a room close to the ballroom. And when he called up, I think the person on the phone said, "What tournament are you talking about?"
Oh.
So they called me on a Tuesday for a Thursday start to tell me that the ballroom that I had a contract for was not available.
Oh.
Well, they ended up putting us into 2 other rooms, but it turned into it was pretty disastrous, and
not ideal.
It was a problem. So there was another hotel in the area that actually had been interested in our tournament a number of years ago. So one of our players is close personal friends with the owners. So he and I went over, and we're going to be moving to a new home, which is a Holiday Inn, which is about 8 minutes from our previous location. And I'm finalizing the contract with them this week, but that'll be fine. It's going to be a much larger space. It's a nicer hotel, and they really are excited about having us. One of the things that we do, and I failed to talk about it earlier, but we do this raffle, and I found out early on that if you ask many times, 9 out of 10 times you get. And so early on, I started to contact Osprey Publishing and other military publishers like Casemate. I contacted Armchair General Magazine early on and developed a relationship with the publisher there. And then over the years, contacted authors like Bernard Cornwell and John Wilcox, who writes these Simon Fonthill novels, and this Irish author who I got friendly with, John Stack, who does these Roman naval novels and whatnot, and lots of them have donated, signed copies, multiple books. There have been times when I'd get $400 worth of books from Osprey, or get all kinds of stuff, and I would augment it by buying some prizes myself, and then, I'd include some things like, models that I had that were part of my stash, and I'd buy helmets. Sometimes, people would donate stuff. Sometimes some of the players would bring books of their own or things that they had, and we'd use some of them. And it just became a part of the tournament that people look forward to. And we're trying to streamline it because it does end up sort of cutting into tournament time, and we're trying to keep it down because there are times when we've had to take as much as 45 minutes or more away from gaming time on that Saturday in the middle of those 2 scenarios that day. People like LFT donate every year. The Bounding Fire guys, they're terrific. This Dispatches from the Bunker, Death to Fascism. The Friendly Fire guys. We always a whole bunch of scenario packs that are part of the raffle. And I can at some point I'll send you a couple of pictures of some of the dioramas, and
that'd be great.
I'll send you a video or a couple of pictures of the raffles. They've been pretty impressive over the years.
Yeah, that'd be great. We'll post them with the show because we are about an hour here.
Okay.
We should probably wrap it up. And anything else that you want to add, or Jeff?
No, other than to say just thank you very much. Certainly, I've ASL has really enriched my life, since the early '80s. It really has. It's offered me a lot of things that wouldn't have existed without it in terms of friendships and camaraderie and places to go and things to do and things to be involved with. So, and my life would have been a lot different without it. And so people like you who, work hard to sort of further it and get the word out and tell people about all these different aspects of this great hobby are really to be commended and appreciated. So thanks a lot. I'm honored that you chose me and gave me this soapbox.
Yep, pleasure. It's been a perfect show. So very interesting, and I will say we'll try to get out. You never know.
Well, and if nothing else, we'll try to mention the tournament as often as we can, and hopefully, attendance will go up a little bit, and there'll be more prizes to spread around to more people this time. So maybe people will only go home with 3 instead of 4.
Yeah, the one thing, and I'll leave you with this. We tried the past few years to pump up the starter kit play. And Mitch Abrams is a guy who came on board with us to kind of be like our starter kit guru and tournament director. And unfortunately, we've never been able to get the number of starter kit players up over maybe, 2 or 3. And we were hopeful that we could sort of, get as many as 8 so we could have a real starter kit tournament within a tournament. And unfortunately, for whatever reason, we've been unable to do that. So if at some point you guys can help in that respect and get more starter kit players interested in coming out and try giving it a try, that'd be great.
Okay,
we'll do what we can.
They've all heard it here. So
okay.
All right.
Thanks
well,
a
thank
lot.
you very much.
Thanks again, Joe.
Thanks. Happy New Year and a healthy New Year to you guys.
Same
yes,
to
you
Take
too,
care.
and everyone there.
Take
care.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.